The unraveling had actually begun weeks before that blowout at the club. I just hadn't seen the signs for what they were. Melanie had been rolling in later and later, blaming it on sudden work crunches or impromptu nights out with her so-called friends. I bought it at first. She'd always been career-obsessed, the kind who lived for her next promotion. But something didn't sit right. That uneasy feeling crept in like an unwanted guest who refused to leave. One evening, while doing laundry, I reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a wrinkled receipt. It was for an extravagant dinner at a high-end place we'd once promised to visit together, someday. I tried to brush it off. Told myself it had to be a team dinner or maybe a client meeting. Still, the nagging doubt wouldn't quit. Her phone behavior shifted too. She used to toss it on the kitchen counter without a second thought. Now, it was practically glued to her hand. No more pings or chimes either. Notifications were mysteriously silent. When I casually asked what she was laughing at one night, she forced a laugh and muttered, "Just work stuff," without even glancing up. That was the moment something inside me changed, like a thread had snapped. But I didn't have proof. I couldn't just accuse her. Meanwhile, our weekends, once full of laughter and little family traditions, turned hollow. Melanie was there in body, but her mind? Somewhere else entirely. Even during dinner, she'd zone out. The kids felt it too. "Why's Mom so quiet lately?" our oldest asked one Sunday. I offered some half-hearted reassurance, even though I didn't believe a word of it myself. Then came the moment that cracked the illusion wide open, a simple grocery run. I ran into one of Melanie's close friends. Her greeting was stiff, her smile barely hanging on. "Melanie's been working like crazy lately, huh?" she said, but her tone didn't match her words. It was loaded, like a warning wrapped in small talk. That night, I waited for Melanie. Midnight passed. Then 1 a.m. Nothing. At 2 a.m., a text buzzed in. "Staying with friends. Don't wait up." That hollow in my gut turned into a gaping hole. Something was very, very wrong. And I needed answers. It all came crashing down when I walked into the club and saw him. That was the moment everything clicked into place. The lies, the late nights, the evasion. Dee was there too, the woman who had clearly helped my wife pull this disappearing act. I turned to her, disbelief thick in my voice. "What the hell is wrong with you, Dee? How could you be part of this? We trusted you." We'd had long talks in the past about fidelity, both of us adamant that cheating was beyond forgiveness. Yet here she was, supporting the very thing we'd sworn was unforgivable. She just shrugged like it was no big deal. "He's famous," she said casually, like that explained everything. "You'll get over it." I couldn't hold back. I stepped closer, voice cutting through the noise. "I always figured you weren't the brightest, but wow, I clearly gave you too much credit. Do me a favor, if you ever see me drowning, just keep walking." She didn't flinch. Didn't care. It wasn't a conversation anymore. It was the end of pretending we were ever friends. As I turned to leave, a massive bouncer stepped into my path, blocking the way with a smug grin. "You're done for the night. Head back to your table. Drinks are on the house." My voice dropped to a low warning. "How much is he paying you to babysit me?" "Whatever it is, you'll need every cent if you don't get out of my way." He faltered, but didn't move. "You can't touch me," he replied, trying to sound tough. I leaned in, calm but furious. "Then make sure you finish me off, because if I walk away from this, I don't forget. I don't forgive. And maybe I'll pay someone to make sure you remember this night every time you step outside." He froze just long enough for me to shoulder past. Near the exit, someone grabbed my arm. I whipped around, fist clenched, but it was Maya. "Think about your kids," she said, pleading. I snapped. Did she think about them when she ran off with him? "I'll always be there for my kids, but their mother? She's dead to me." Maya looked hurt, but I didn't care anymore. I turned to leave. A voice called from behind. "Bob, don't do this." I spun around, eyes scanning the group. My voice came out like a blade. "I didn't throw this family away." "She did. Now look me in the eye and tell me you'd forgive your wife if she did what she did to me." Nobody answered. I locked eyes with Ethan. "Oh, right, you already know. She's seeing him again, isn't she?" Ethan froze. Nina turned and walked away, head down. The others started bickering, and I stepped into the elevator without another word. Back home, I packed my bag. I didn't touch Melanie's things. If she wanted them, she could come crawling back to get them. 30 minutes later, I was heading to my car when a few of those same so-called friends blocked me in. "Move," I said, voice cold as ice. "If you're still here when I start this car, you'll regret it." Zane stepped forward, maybe to talk, maybe to stop me, but I cut him off with a solid punch to the gut. None of them were fighters. They'd never been in a real brawl. I had. As a teenager, I'd had a bad temper. Fights. Police. Therapy. I'd learned how to manage it, usually. But tonight, I didn't want to manage anything. I wanted out. I started the car, looked back at them, cold, calm, and finished. Slamming the gas, I peeled out of the lot, forcing them to jump out of the way. I had no destination in mind. She'd been gone over an hour by now, probably wrapped around him, playing perfect couple. Part of me wanted to find them and tear it all down, but that was fantasy. He was a pro athlete, millions in the bank, mansion behind gates. I was just some guy with a chip on his shoulder and a heart full of fury. And fury alone wasn't enough. At a red light, an idea sparked. Not perfect, but something. I pulled into a late-night diner with free Wi-Fi and called my niece. I offered her $500 to help. She didn't even hesitate. Minutes later, she showed up with her friend Zane. I handed the waitress $400 to close the place early. We had work to do and private. Once we had the diner to ourselves, I laid everything out, how Melanie left me for a pro athlete, how her so-called friends helped her vanish like it was some grand adventure, and how I wasn't about to let it slide. I wasn't just angry, I needed retribution. Jordan's eyes narrowed. Wait, your wife ran off with some overpaid jock, and her friends covered for her. She hissed. What kind of garbage people are these? They're her old friends from school, I muttered. She's the one who changed. Not me. I leaned in. Now listen to my plan, and tell me how crazy it sounds. She smirked. Zane, grab the black box. The black box was their private, untraceable laptop, prepped for things people don't talk about in polite company. Jordan promised it was safe. Within minutes, she'd broken into Melanie's social media. She looked up, ready for chaos. Let's make this ugly. Zane hesitated. You sure? Once this goes live, there's no coming back. I'm sure, I said flatly. She made her choice. Now she gets to live with it. Jordan got to work. She crafted posts as if Melanie had written them herself, graphic, scandalous stuff. Posts bragging about her new lifestyle, her upgrade to the celebrity circle, and disgusting comments about the football player. She thanked Dee for keeping her distracted, even hinting that this wasn't the first time, dropping references to wild girls' weekends that suddenly made too much sense. She added fake replies from Melanie's crew, cheering her on, sharing their own shady stories like it was a twisted support group. The posts were brutal, unforgiving, the kind of stuff that turns reputations to ash. When she was done, Jordan leaned back. There. Her social life? A smoldering crater. I nodded. Keep going. She found old photos of Melanie and the football player. Cozy. Intimate. The kind of pictures that don't lie. She posted them, tagging him and linking back to the public meltdown. By midnight, notifications were coming in nonstop. My phone lit up. I could imagine hers was going nuclear, though knowing Melanie, she probably had it on silent, wrapped in silk sheets at his place. But we weren't done. Jordan took it to Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, anywhere people knew her. Comments exploded. Is this real? Your poor husband. Who brags about this? Even her favorite aunt chimed in. Jordan, still pretending to be Melanie, responded coolly. Not a joke. I saw my chance and took it. Who wouldn't want to sleep with someone famous? And then, don't believe me? Drop by 130 Wyndham Circle around 10 a.m., catch the Walk of Shame or Walk of Fame. More rolled in. You think your marriage will survive this? Melanie's account replied. I love my husband. He'll forgive me. It was just one night. I swear I'll never do it again. The backlash came hard. If you planned it once, you'll do it again. I'm done with you. That one? Her boss's wife. Jordan posted the mess to Melanie's company profile too. She didn't even flinch. This is going to be a fun Monday, she said. Someone commented. You destroyed every reason he had to trust you. Her cousin replied. Don't message me again. You're blocked. Jordan paused for the first time. I used to like her. You still want to keep going? I nodded. We're not finished. She went further, posting the scandal to the football team's official page, the NFL, even their sponsored charities. Zane tracked down a sports writer who hated the guy. I called him using a voice scrambler. Took a married woman from a club. I told him. Check with the bouncer if you don't believe me. The guy was hungry for off-season drama. He pounced. Jordan blasted the story to every local news station and paper. By sunrise, Ryan's gated neighborhood was a media circus. At 8 a.m., a team rep knocked on his door. He opened it in a robe. Behind him, Melanie, matching robe, bedhead, and all. Cameras flashed like crazy. He slammed the door, but it was too late. Melanie's scream, wild and furious, echoed through that expensive fortress. She realized her accounts were gone. Her online persona was a smoldering wreck. Jordan later told me over 3,000 comments poured in within 6 hours. At 10 a.m., Melanie left the house trying to cover her face. Paparazzi still got her, slipping into Ryan's car like she belonged there. They weren't amateurs, they were waiting. They followed them to her place, where more reporters were camped out. As she bolted to the door, the questions flew. Did your husband know? Are you two a couple now? Was it worth it? Meanwhile, her family had seen everything. Both our moms were Facebook friends, and neither held back. I took the kids to my parents' house, and ironically, her parents showed up too, shell-shocked. For media events parked outside her house. The fallout was far from over. I rented a hotel room just to breathe. The receptionist gave me a look, clearly recognized my last name from the news. Ran into a few old friends in the lobby. The whole situation felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's disaster unfold. Running on 30 hours of no sleep and pure adrenaline, I bumped into Dee. The same friend who helped Melanie vanish like she was escaping prison. You've wrecked her life, Dee snapped. For nothing. It was just a fantasy. I laughed, cold and bitter. She nuked our marriage. And this? This is just the fallout. Dee brought up some old fling Melanie had with a hockey player. I barely had time to process before her husband lunged at me. I fought back, nothing dirty, and I made sure it was caught on security cameras. Self-defense. Plain and simple. I looked around at the crowd of enablers. You all helped destroy what I built. I hope your lives crashed just like mine did. I never went back to her home. Never stepped foot through that door again. Melanie tried to downplay everything, still acting like this was some minor misstep. It's not a big deal, she insisted. Sure, I slept with someone else, but it's over now. Like that was supposed to mean something. Can't we just move on? That's what Melanie had the nerve to say after everything. Like she hadn't detonated our marriage and expected us to just walk through the wreckage together, hand in hand. She even framed it as some fantasy fulfilled, gushing about how she'd admired Ryan Callahan since his early Chicago days. Like that made it okay. Once I filed for divorce and listed infidelity, her tone shifted fast. The dreamy delusion gave way to fury and desperation. She tried threats, guilt trips, apologies that meant nothing. But I was done. Her betrayal wasn't a mistake. It was a choice, one she planned in advance. The fallout was immediate. Her job was hanging by a thread, and her boss's wife barely tolerated her presence. It got worse when paparazzi bribed the club's bouncer. He spilled everything. Not just about that night, but about Ryan's history. Turns out he wasn't just some reckless playboy. He had a reputation as a serial homewrecker. Ryan probably regretted signing with the Panthers. North Carolina is one of the few states that still allows alienation of affection lawsuits. My lawyer said to wait until the divorce was final. But even before I made a move, Ryan's team in the NFL went into damage control mode. Then came the suits. One night, I opened my door to a man with a briefcase. Sir, I'd like to leave, I said, slamming it in his face. He started pounding on the door like a maniac. I called the cops. They escorted him away, but not before he turned to my security camera and shook his fist like some cartoon villain. Then I started getting phone calls, one from the team's new owner. How did you get my number? I asked. He sighed. Does it matter? I hung up, changed my number. Did it again the next day? For 8 days straight, I played that game. Then came the charity angle. Hi, I'm with Go Deep, the caller said. We're not asking for a donation, we want to offer you money. I paused. Why? Our founder is Ryan Callahan. Click. I didn't even answer. Just blocked the number. After that, angry emails started rolling in. People accusing me of ruining Ryan's charity, of hurting children. I finally called one back to clear the air and immediately got accused of damaging Ryan's image. Let me be clear, I said calmly. Ryan seduced my wife in public with dozens of witnesses. She stayed overnight. Whether she admits it or not, we know the truth. If he wants to apologize publicly, maybe we'll talk. That wouldn't be wise, the man warned. Then tell him to invent time travel, undo what he did, and we'll talk. Otherwise, don't call again. Later, I vented to Zane and Jordan about how much I hated phones, the fake apologies, the half-truths, the excuses. That gave Jordan an idea, an app that mimicked the sound of slamming a phone receiver. It was silly. It was cathartic. It took off. 50,000 downloads in 2 months, enough to help me put a down payment on a new house. The kids loved the app, but leaving them behind? That shattered me. Melanie, though, stayed in her fantasy. It was just one night, she said. One night too many, I replied. You planned it. You made sure I couldn't stop you. You stole our future. She looked shocked. Maybe because I never yelled before. Maybe because she thought I'd never push back. The kids were hurting. I got them into therapy. The therapist, thankfully, was the right kind of blunt. She told them in gentle terms that their mom made a serious mistake, and now there were consequences. She had us do separate sessions and shared summaries with me. I paid for everything. Melanie, of course, spun her own version for the kids. Said it wasn't serious. Said divorce wasn't necessary. When our daughter asked what she'd done, Melanie brushed her off. You'll understand when you're older. Our 4-year-old son, already picking up bits from the news and whispers, asked questions too. Melanie just called it a mistake and said she was fixing it. He didn't believe her. He held on to that betrayal in a way kids shouldn't have to. In my own session, I answered honestly. Yes, I'm divorcing your mother. Because she broke a promise. And promises matter. I tried to explain it simply. If I promised to pick you up every Wednesday, and one day I just didn't show up, because I chose something else, how many times would it take before you stopped trusting me? I never insulted Melanie in front of them. I made sure they knew they were loved, by both of us, even if we couldn't be together. Melanie didn't return the favor. She kept undermining everything I said, claiming I was just angry and stubborn. Eventually, the therapist snapped. She confronted Melanie directly. Your kids already know your relationship with your husband is over. Stop confusing them. Accept responsibility. I suggest you begin individual counseling. I won't be continuing with you. The court stepped in. 8 mandatory counseling sessions. The therapist was allowed to end them after 4 if no progress was made. At the hearing, I kept it simple. Your Honor, I'll complete the 8 sessions, but I'm not interested in reconciliation. Just co-parenting. If more sessions are ordered, I'll accept whatever fines or jail time come with refusing. I also have a request. I paused. The courtroom leaned in. I'd like Ryan Callahan to attend one session. Just one. I want to hear him explain, in a professional setting, why he thinks it's okay to sleep with someone else's wife. I want to hear how that's supposed to not destroy a family. My lawyer looked stunned. Melanie turned pale. Her lawyer panicked, flipping through papers. The judge banged a gavel, barely holding back a smirk. I can't legally require someone to attend counseling for a marriage they're not in, he said. But I'll draft a request. Don't expect much. If you want him here officially, you'll have to subpoena him. He turned to the court counselors. Submit your therapist list, or we'll assign one. Sessions must begin in 2 weeks, the judge ordered. Twice a week. No rescheduling. If you miss one, it counts. Next case. Melanie wasn't happy. Not even close. She cornered me in the parking lot, her jaw tight with resolve. This needs to stop, she said flatly. It's not what I wanted. I paused for a beat. Then what exactly did you expect? I thought you'd be mad but love me enough to move past it, she said, tone softening. It was just one night. That's not worth throwing everything away. Think about everything we've built, our years, our kids. I snapped. It wasn't just one night, I said. It was every night since. Every moment of humiliation. You didn't just cheat, you planned it. You had help sneaking off like some coward slipping through the back door. I would have bet my life you loved me. That's gone now. She flinched, but I kept going. No amount of counseling will fix this. I'll see you at the session. She hesitated, then blurted, wait, I need a favor. I actually laughed. A favor? No. It's about Ryan, she said, eyes darting away. Could you cut him some slack? His charity work is hurting. Think of the children. Like you two thought of ours that night? I shot back. I don't care about his charity. And trust me, this is only the beginning of his problems. Her voice dropped. How do you know that? Then she looked away and admitted it. He called me. I stiffened. How the hell did he get your number? Her cheeks flushed. I gave it to him that night. I stared at her, stunned. What, you hoping for an encore? I don't know why I did it, she muttered. I didn't reply. Just shook my head, climbed into my car, and drove off, amazed she could still surprise me with her audacity. But the pressure didn't stop there. The league, Ryan's team, even random sports media outlets started leaning on me. Emails, voicemails, indirect threats. My own boss, a huge fan of the team, pulled me aside. Maybe it's time to let this go, he suggested. I responded by finding another job. Filed an HR complaint on my way out. He tried to backtrack once he realized how bad it would look publicly, but it was too late. I had him documented. His career was toast. After that, I kept all conversations short and recorded. One-party consent laws in the state made it perfectly legal. A sports radio host invited me on his top-rated show, and I dropped a few bombshells. One quote about a team owner went viral. The man himself called me furious. "You're going to regret this," he threatened. "We'll sue." The host grinned and leaned into the mic. "My guest is nodding." Got a response. I smiled. "Sue me for what, telling the truth? This is a one-party consent state. I can record any conversation I'm a part of. And I won't go legal unless you force my hand. But if you want to talk damages, my lawyer thinks we can charge the team in the league with mental anguish." Click. The owner hung up. The clip spread like wildfire. After that, the call stopped. Ryan, meanwhile, was crumbling under the radar. The media didn't want to touch him anymore unless it was about me or the divorce. Once hailed as a hero, he was now a PR nightmare. Despite his lawyer's advice, he finally cracked and made a major mistake. He showed up at my house. I just moved into the new place. First thing I did? Install the best security system money could buy, ironically, one Ryan himself had promoted in commercials. Turned out, he was right. It worked like a charm. Late one evening, there was a knock at the door. I checked the camera feed from my phone. 3 huge men stood on my porch. Not exactly the friendly neighbor type. My kids were home, so I triggered the silent alarm. Seconds later, my phone rang. "Is this an emergency?" "Yes," I said quickly. "There are 3 large men outside. I don't know them. They're pounding on my door. Stay inside. Officers are 4 minutes out." I hung up and waited, each second crawling by. At the 3-minute mark, I cracked the front door slightly, storm door locked in place. "What do you want?" I asked. One of them stepped closer. "Ryan sent us. Drop the legal action. And if I don't? Then we'll teach you a lesson about cooperation," he said flatly. "You're trespassing. Leave. Now." The biggest guy shook his head. "Looks like he needs some convincing." Before I could react, he yanked the storm door clean off its hinges, like it was made of plastic. They were about to force their way in when a voice roared behind them. "Police. Hands up." The 3 men froze. Their faces twisted in fury, but the fight was over. One looked ready to resist, but his friends weren't on board. Within seconds, they were face down on the ground, wrists in cuffs. The officers took my statement, reviewed the footage, and charged all 3 with trespassing and more. Turns out, premeditated trespass with intent to harm carries serious penalties. The fallout was immediate. One of the men worked at the local stadium. Another was a friend. The third? A practice squad player. Apparently, Ryan promised him a permanent spot on the roster if he helped convince me to back off, even though Ryan had zero authority to offer that. The other 2? Paid $1,000 each. Chump change for what it cost Ryan in the end. All 3 pled guilty. The fines were steep, and Ryan covered every cent worse. He had to appear in court himself for orchestrating it. His lawyers managed to get the charges dropped to a misdemeanor, but he wasn't off the hook. $5,000 in fines. 200 hours of community service. TMZ caught him in an orange vest, picking up trash along the highway. That clip? 600,000 views in a week. From celebrity to cautionary tale, all in a matter of months. Melanie was quickly becoming the most expensive mistake Ryan had ever made. His golden boy image faded fast. Fans who once worshipped him turned savage. At a home game, someone held up a sign, "Put someone's wife on the goal line, that'll get his attention." Stadium security confiscated it, but the photo hit social media and exploded. Nearly 1 million views in 2 days. On the field, Ryan started to crack. His focus was gone. Sponsors backed away. One major campaign was put on hold, which we all knew meant canceled for good. But karma doesn't always land where you expect it. One night, I was leaving the office when 4 men jumped me in the parking lot. No words, no warning, just fists. In 90 seconds, they shattered 2 fingers, broke my leg, cracked ribs, and fractured my cheekbone. They were efficient, professional. It could have been worse, but a coworker stepped out and yelled. They bolted. 10 minutes later, I was in an ambulance. An hour after that, I was in a hospital bed, slipping in and out of consciousness with a concussion. At one point, I thought I saw Melanie sitting beside me, but when I woke again, she was gone. It took a week before I was stable enough to return to work. Police pulled footage from nearby businesses, but the attackers had planned it too well, hats, baggy clothes, no clear angles. One officer said, "If anyone holds a grudge against you, let us know." I told them everything. They questioned Ryan. According to the report, he laughed. Said he didn't like me, but denied involvement. The police didn't buy it, but they had no proof. Meanwhile, I stopped seeing the kids on weekends. I didn't want them to see me bruised, broken, and limping. It hurt, but shielding them felt more important. Melanie was horrified. She offered to help, bring meals, run errands, stay over if I needed. I declined. Her concern felt hollow. Therapy dragged on. By session 5, even the counselor had had enough. She opened with a blunt statement. "We've reached a deadlock," she said, tone tight. "Honestly, I don't think you two are going to move forward. Melanie, you've consistently refused to acknowledge your actions were wrong. You act as if cheating on your husband shouldn't affect your marriage." "Do I?" Melanie snapped. "Yes," the therapist said, unmoved. "You left your husband standing in a club while you went home with another man and used your friends to help you pull it off." She paused. "Let me flip it. If he had done the same to you, left you stranded in public while his friends helped him lie to you, would you be so forgiving?" Melanie opened her mouth, but the therapist raised her hand. "Don't speak yet. Think about it." She turned to me, voice softening. "Let me ask you something. Until the night she walked out of that club, you loved her. She'd been faithful for years. And she still insists this was a one-time mistake, something she regrets but can't explain. She swears it's over. Is there any part of you that wants to try again?" She gestured to Melanie. "You speak first. Don't interrupt her." Melanie hesitated, then spoke quietly. "You say I've shown no remorse, but that's not true," she said. "I never imagined it would destroy our marriage. I knew you'd be upset, but not like this. I regret what I did, all of it. I promise I'll never do anything like that again. I understand the cost now. I just want to fix this. Please, even if you can't forgive me fully, come home." Her voice cracked slightly. Her eyes begged. I didn't blink. "You can say whatever you want, Melanie," I said calmly. "But deep down, you knew. You knew this would hurt. You knew I wasn't the kind of man who would just smile and say, 'It's fine. Everyone makes mistakes.' If I had done that, you'd have lost all respect for me." She looked away. "And maybe you wouldn't look for another opportunity, but if one came along, you'd take it, knowing I'd forgive you again." I leaned forward slightly. "I'm not giving you that kind of marriage. It's over. I'm divorcing you. You can drag this out if you want, but eventually the court will grant it. Don't make it harder than it already is." I turned to the therapist. "Are we done here?" She exhaled slowly. "Yes. I'll submit my report to the court by Wednesday. I'll be recommending divorce. This marriage is irreparably broken." Melanie reacted instantly. "No, I'm not giving up. Think of the kids." "I think of them every day," I said sharply. "I don't have them. But you, tell me, Melanie, when you were lying in his mansion that night, how often did you think about our kids?" She opened her mouth, but I didn't let her answer. Was it worth it? Because for the rest of us, for me, for our children, it wasn't. She looked down, but I didn't stop. "You made a colossal mistake, and now we all have to live with it. I'll see you in court." By the end of the final hearing, everyone looked drained. Her lawyer was a mess. Mine wasn't much better, just more satisfied. The judge, clearly tired of the games, overruled one last stalling tactic and declared the divorce final. Melanie left without saying a word. My lawyer turned to me and smiled. "Congratulations," he said quietly. "You're free." The very next day, we filed the lawsuit against Ryan for alienation of affection. He wasn't required to live in North Carolina or sign with the Panthers, but the law still applied. And when he found out, his reaction was nothing short of explosive. His lawyer groaned, "He can't be serious." "He is," someone else replied. "And unfortunately, it's legal here." Outdated? Sure. Should have been repealed? Probably. But it hadn't. And now, it was going to cost him. Ryan's PR team begged him to settle quietly, make it go away before more damage was done. But I wasn't after money. I wanted his name dragged through the same filth he helped drag mine through. I wanted consequences. So I refused every settlement offer. The investigators we hired found plenty. A bouncer and even a team coordinator admitted they'd been paid to help Ryan pull off his getaway. He had people shielding him from the fallout, and we made sure the court knew. Ryan tried to dodge court appearances, citing game obligations. The judge wasn't having it. "Take a later flight," he said dryly. "Be here tomorrow." Ryan's smile didn't help him in court. His lawyers tried to pack the jury with friendly faces, but mine saw it coming. We countered. And when the trial started, the truth unraveled quickly. First, he denied knowing Melanie. Then, once cornered by evidence, he admitted she'd been at his house, but claimed nothing happened. That defense fell apart fast. Then Melanie, of all people, gave us more ammunition. She'd written me a long, rambling letter, hoping I'd finally understand her side. Since the letter was addressed to me and in my possession, we submitted it into evidence. Her testimony only made things worse. She tried painting Ryan as an abuser, but the facts didn't back it up. Her own letter contradicted her on the stand. She claimed 3 or 4 encounters. Under oath, it turned out to be 5. The jury didn't even need an hour. Because part of the process required financial disclosure, the entire courtroom learned that Ryan, a former NFL star, had raked in $96 million over his 7-year career. When my lawyer calculated the potential settlement, he actually blinked twice and sat back in shock. The jury awarded me $30 million, nearly a third of Ryan's total assets. It was the largest alienation of affection award in the state's history. The previous record? Just under $9 million. The law had been modified since it was written, but still allowed up to 1/3 of the defendant's wealth to be awarded in these cases. No one ever expected it to apply to someone worth nearly $100 million. But it did. Ryan's lawyers filed an appeal briefly. Then they realized the appeal might actually increase the payout if Ryan's net worth went up in the meantime. They dropped it. Around the same time, Ryan was set to receive a massive contract payment. We timed everything perfectly. Then came more lawsuits. My lawyer hit him with 4 additional cases, others claiming he'd interfered in their marriages. 2 were divorced, 1 was still married but barely hanging on, and 1 couple said he'd crossed a clear line. Even Melanie filed her own lawsuit, a last-ditch attempt to look like a victim. A few of the cases were settled quickly, costing Ryan $4 million each. Even after all that, he still had tens of millions. But the revelations didn't stop. Investigators found he'd had an affair with a teammate's wife and a one-night stand with another. At a game shortly after, it showed. His teammates barely looked at him. 3 brutal hits later, including one that left him dazed and concussed, the Panthers benched him. They cited a morality clause in his contract and decided they couldn't justify keeping him. He was traded to Green Bay, where his performance dipped. He earned just 20% of what his original contract promised. After 1 mediocre year there, he signed a $4 million deal with Denver. But again, nothing long-term. Eventually, he landed with Cincinnati 2 years for $2.5 million, with strict clauses ensuring he'd lose everything if he so much as flirted with controversy. His gameplay was solid, but never spectacular again. When his contract ended, they didn't renew. At 34, worn down and nursing lingering injuries, he retired quietly. He tried hosting a radio show in Cincinnati for 2 years, then faded into the background. Despite everything, he still had around $50 million, a shadow of the empire he could have had if he'd kept his personal life in check. The last I heard of him, he bought 2 car dealerships in California and was opening a third. I read about it in a sports magazine, part of a Where Are They Now piece. The photo showed him at a ribbon-cutting ceremony. He'd gained weight and shaved his head, likely from balding. Still, the remaining millions in his name were probably enough to keep him interesting to certain people. For a second, I considered mailing the article to Melanie. Speaking of her, she walked away with half our savings and got to keep the house until our youngest turns 18. After that, she either has to buy out my share or we sell and split it. She also received child support, based on my income before the lawsuit. It was more than fair. They're still my kids. I made sure they had what they needed. I even bought Melanie a new SUV after she wrecked the old one, not for her sake, but so the kids would be safe on the road. Sometimes, I wondered if it aided her, seeing me living comfortably while she had no access to the settlement. She wasn't broke, but she wasn't rich either. She eventually got her own payout, a small settlement from Ryan and a cut from an app we built during our marriage. That, plus child support and a stable job, kept her afloat. But she knew. She knew she'd gambled everything for one night of fame and thrill. And she lost. The app we developed during our marriage had its moment in the spotlight, especially the voice feature that let users send phrases like, "Go to hell," and "Don't ever call me again" for a small fee. Surprisingly, it earned Melanie around $30,000 a year for 3 years before interest faded. She kept her half. I used mine to pad the kids' college funds, adding to it whenever a payment came in. Years later, I sat down and did the math, Everything Ryan lost from lawsuits, reputation hits, and contract implosions. Somewhere between $110 and $170 million. Melanie's decisions hadn't just wrecked our marriage. She'd made herself part of one of the most expensive divorces in U.S. history. Everyone leaves their mark, I guess. Lena got divorced less than a year after mine. Maya and her husband split around 18 months later. The couples where the wives had cheated? They didn't even make it to the end of my proceedings. Some others stayed together, but I stopped keeping track. After that final courtroom morning, I never spoke to any of them again. The years moved on. But occasionally, I'd wake in the quiet dark, reaching instinctively for Melanie, habit, memory, whatever it was. Usually, it followed dreams of the way things used to be, before everything broke. It was always jarring. I never remarried. I dated, carefully, cautiously, but I stayed guarded. It didn't take long to notice that some women were more interested in my bank account than me. That only made me more withdrawn. My kids grew up loving soccer. My son played for the team vibe more than skill. My daughter, though, she was serious, talented. Her best friend was slightly better and often stayed over, bringing her mom, Tessa, into our lives. Tessa was exhausted. Her ex had vanished, dodging child support while she scraped by. Her daughter mentioned once, casually, that they were barely making ends meet. Quietly, I found her ex had him arrested for non-payment. Turned out he had a solid job, just no intention of supporting his kid. The judge gave him 2 years to pay off the debt or face jail time. That ruling doubled Tessa's monthly payments and gave her some breathing room. I never told her I was behind it. But the change was obvious. Tessa started smiling more, walking taller, even refreshing her wardrobe. She caught more than a few eyes at soccer games, especially in athletic shorts. By then, we'd become close. I acted as her buffer against unwanted attention, and the girls loved playing matchmaker. At some point, holding hands at games became natural. Tessa and her daughter were spending most nights at my house, her in the guest room, the girls sharing a room. I'd bought a beautiful piece of land by then. 40 acres of hills, a pond, a 10-acre pasture, and a barn with 6 stalls. The previous owners had been horse people. I wasn't. Horses were huge. Intimidating. Tessa found my hesitation hilarious. After a few months of her teasing, I finally said, "Fine. Pick horses for you, and the kids. I'll cover everything, but I'm not shoveling manure." Tessa agreed, with one condition: the kids had to take care of the horses. No shortcuts. No slacking. If they didn't, the horses would go. Before I realized it, we were co-parenting, making decisions together. Following her lead felt easy. That Christmas, she surprised me with a horse of my own, a big, mischievous pinto. She said I needed to ride with them. I tried to laugh it off, but when she threatened to spend less time with me if I didn't, the kids panicked. So I gave in. Tessa became family. My son, who had struggled emotionally after the divorce, found a steady calm in her presence. The girls told her their fears and secrets. The bond between them was real, unshakable. I even started riding with them. I found myself helping with chores, even shoveling manure into the compost Tessa used for her growing vegetable garden. One afternoon, she was wrestling with a stubborn cultivator. I couldn't help but laugh. She didn't appreciate it, but I finished the tilling for her anyway. The kids helped too, after Tessa told them no one got to eat from the garden unless they pitched in. Fair enough. One day, after dropping the girls off at soccer camp, I asked her, "Do you ever think about dating again?" She flushed, gave me a look like I'd missed something obvious. Then she laughed. "I am dating," she said. I blinked. "You are?" "Yeah," she grinned. "He's a nice guy. A little slow on the uptake." A twinge of jealousy hit me hard, until she smirked. "I'm dating you, silly. Think about it. How many times have we gone out to dinner, seen movies, taken the kids on trips? We're practically living at your house 5 days a week. This isn't just family stuff. This is us." She reached for my hand. "Your kids call me Mom when you're not around. Sophie's planning to take you to Father-Daughter Day at her new school. It's lucky she switched, otherwise we'd have been double-booked." Then her voice dropped, sincere and calm. "I've been in love with you for a long time. I know you've been hurt. I've been patient. But let me ask you something." She leaned in. "When was the last time you were with anyone else?" I didn't answer. She smiled. "You can't even remember, can you? Maybe that's because you've had feelings, too, and we're just afraid to say it out loud." "Well," Tessa said, "this ends today." We were stopped at an intersection. "If you want me," she continued, "turn right and take us home. If not, turn left, and drop me at my apartment. I grinned and tapped the turn signal. Looks like the left turn signal's broken. Tessa smiled wide. Then I guess we're turning right. But brace yourself. There's going to be a collision. A big one. Let's go home, I said. Later that night, as we settled in, she rested her head on my shoulder and said gently, I know what happened with your ex. And I want you to hear this. I would never betray your trust. When I'm in, I'm all in. I promise you that. A few months later, she offered to sign a prenup. I snapped at the suggestion, maybe too harshly, but she just laughed and never brought it up again. Melanie, meanwhile, struggled in the aftermath of the fallout. Her affair, the very public lawsuit, the headlines, it clung to her like smoke. She eventually left her job, saying the emotional weight was too much. Financially, she was fine, thanks to the generous divorce settlement. She took almost a full year off before getting back to work. Eventually, she joined a startup and invested $1 million for a 10% stake. She'd done her homework, and the company began gaining traction. Not bad. Out of curiosity, I looked into the company myself. They had a good product, but they were clearly underfunded. After speaking with my investment team, I quietly invested $5 million under our children's names. When they went public, I gave Melanie the voting proxies. Say what you will, but I knew she'd always look out for the kids. That investment made her the controlling partner. When the company restructured, she was promoted to VP of Sales and Production. She threw herself into it, working over 50 hours a week. And for the first time in years, she seemed energized. Meanwhile, the kids spent most of their time at my place, doting on their little brother. Tessa, 6 years younger than me, had made it clear early on she wanted one more child. Caleb Rhodes, named after her grandfather, was now almost 2. The older kids adored him, and he gave Tessa some breathing room. At my urging, Tessa left her job to focus on raising the kids full-time. With 3 teenagers and a toddler, it was no small task. Despite the peace in my life, I still had the occasional sleepless night. I'd lie awake, wondering how different everything might have been if Melanie hadn't cheated. And during those nights, I noticed something. If I got up, for water or the bathroom, Tessa would start tossing and turning. But the moment I returned and placed a hand on her back or shoulder, she'd settle, breathing deeper, drifting into sleep. That quiet dependency, her need for closeness, told me more than words ever could. In public, it was the same. Walking through stores, crossing parking lots, if we weren't wrangling the kids, her hand was always in mine. It wasn't for show. It was her instinct. Something I never had with Melanie. I thought of that again during our son's high school graduation. Tessa had stepped away to take photos with his friends. Melanie and her new husband were there too. Our sons had become close, which made things less awkward. Watching them together reminded me of how Tessa and I began, friendship turning to something deeper than lasting. Melanie had been remarried 3 years by then. She and her new husband seemed content. During a quiet moment, Melanie approached me, her eyes heavier than usual. "Can we talk?" she asked softly. "Sure," I said. "What's on your mind?" "I owe you something," she began. "It's long overdue. 12 years, in fact." I nodded, letting her speak. "I need to apologize. I'm so sorry. To this day, I can't explain what I was thinking or why I believed it would be okay. For a long time, I was angry you divorced me. I convinced myself that sleeping with someone famous was harmless, a thrill. Something you'd secretly be proud of, not hurt by." She gave a rueful smile. "I know how insane that sounds now." She took a deep breath. "It wasn't until a couple years into therapy that my counselor asked me something. Do you remember that silly celebrity list game we used to play? You always said Rachel Adams." I laughed. Still got a soft spot for her. Melanie chuckled. "My therapist said, okay, now imagine he actually did it. Imagine he left you at a party to spend the night with Rachel Adams, then came back like it was no big deal." I told her he'd never do that. She looked down. But then I really thought about it. And I got furious. The idea of being left like that, humiliated, replaced. That anger? That was my breakthrough. Because that was your reality. And I finally got it. She paused. "I was wrong. About all of it. And I'm sorry." I appreciated the honesty. It didn't change the past, but it gave it closure. Back home, Tessa sat beside me while I read a bedtime story to Caleb. The older kids had drifted to their rooms, the house peaceful. After I closed the book and turned off the light, Tessa rested her head against my shoulder and whispered, "You okay?" "Yeah," I said. "I think I finally am." And I knew nothing could ever erase what had happened. Melanie looked at me, voice steady but laced with regret. So here it is. I was wrong. You had every right to end our marriage. If the roles were reversed, I wouldn't have trusted you again either, no matter how many times you apologized. She exhaled slowly. If I could go back, I'd laugh in that guy's face the second he asked me to dance. Her sincerity caught me off guard. It felt real this time. Thank you, Melanie, I said, after a pause. Hearing that now, it helps, in a way. As I walked away, her words followed me. Life doesn't offer do-overs. Burned bridges rarely get rebuilt, and the water that once flowed beneath them never flows the same way again. I had history with Melanie, but with Tessa, I had something more. Something whole. After the court battles, the media chaos, the betrayal and grief, life settled into a strange calm. Like I'd been living in the center of a hurricane for years, and now, with the storm past, the silence felt almost surreal. But it wasn't empty. The house was filled with laughter. With the sound of Tessa calling the kids to dinner, of Caleb giggling at the dog, of teenage arguments over what to watch. But late at night, when the house quieted, the silence became something else. A mirror. One that showed me how far I'd come, and how much it had taken to get here. Sometimes I'd wander out to the barn after dark. The rhythmic brushing of the horses calmed me. The way they stood still, unbothered, grounded me in a way nothing else could. Tessa would occasionally join me, leaning against the stall, her voice soft in the dim light. You're a natural, she'd tease, I sparkling. Who would have thought? As the years passed, the pain dulled. Not gone. Just faded. Melanie and I found a fragile peace, mostly for the kids' sake. She'd remarried and seemed genuinely content in her own way. But every now and then, at family events, I'd catch a look in her eyes, an unspoken what if. Not bitter. Not angry. Just quiet acknowledgement. Tessa was something else entirely. A reminder that life has a funny way of surprising you just when you least expect it. She brought warmth into our lives, for me and the kids. My daughter once told me, she's my role model, strong, kind, and real. Watching them together filled me with a kind of gratitude I still can't fully express. One evening, we sat on the porch as the sun dipped below the hills. The light stretched long across the pasture. Tessa reached for my hand and asked, "Do you ever think about forgiveness?" I didn't answer right away. "For Melanie?" I asked. She nodded. "Not for her sake. For yours." She looked out at the fading sky. "Carrying anger, resentment. It's heavy. And you've carried it a long time." I leaned back, taking her words in. Tessa always had a way of getting past my defenses, gently nudging me toward things I wasn't quite ready to face. "I've thought about it," I admitted. "I don't think I'm there yet. Maybe someday." She squeezed my hand. "Someday's enough. Just don't let it eat at you. You've built something beautiful here. Don't let the past steal it from you." Her words stuck with me. And slowly, so slowly, I began letting go. Not in some grand, movie moment epiphany. Just a little at a time. A softening around the edges. I realized forgiveness wasn't about condoning what happened. It was about freeing myself from the grip it still had on me. Eventually, Melanie and I had the conversation we'd both been avoiding. It wasn't planned. She was picking up the kids one afternoon, and we ended up in the kitchen, awkward silence between us. Then, finally, she said, "I've been meaning to thank you." I raised an eyebrow. "For everything you've done, for the kids. Even for me. I don't deserve it, but thank you." I looked at her, saw the vulnerability in her expression, something that hadn't been there in years. "I did it for them," I said simply. "But I'm glad you're doing well. We all make mistakes, Melanie. It's what we do after that defines us." She nodded, eyes wet. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "For everything." "I know," I said. And in that moment, I meant it. The bitterness, the fire that had burned between us for years, it wasn't there anymore. Just acceptance. We'd never be what we once were, but maybe we could learn to coexist with some kind of grace. If life has taught me anything, it's that it's full of endings and beginnings. Some doors slam shut, others crack open unexpectedly. Sometimes, you find yourself stuck in the doorway, unsure of which way to go. But every ending, no matter how painful, holds the seed of something new. And as I sat on that porch, Tessa's hand in mine, the sound of laughter drifting from the barn behind us, I knew I'd already stepped through that next door. And this time, I wasn't looking back.